welcome everyone to Sydney Atheists. It's great to have you all here. We're going to have tonight a debate between Steve and Morgan and Hussein about which of their former religions is more crazy. And so we have a few guests to invite, and I'd like to invite them now. We have Steve is our president, and he used to be Jewish. And we also have God with us.
Silence! Woman, I'm watching you! Be glad that I was in such a playful mood when I carved you out of Adam's rib. I don't like women.
We know that.
I like virgins, but not the used ones.
Not for long.
So be quiet. Although I don't need an introduction, let me introduce myself. I am the Lord, the Almighty, the King of Kings. I am the creator of the heavens and the earth. I am the one who brought you my son, the prophets, burning bushes and angels. Woman, I want you.
You can't have me.
Be quiet. I said you shall not have any gods beside me, and I mean it! Tonight, some ignorant sinners, an unknowing dwarfs, a Muslim, a Christian, and a Jew will dare to challenge and ridicule me, the Almighty! They will try to utilize an ungodly thing called reason. Don't let yourself be carried away by these representatives of the devil! I order you not to listen to them. Now, Christian, why do you think you can betray me? That's ridiculous! Now carry out your offensive insults. You have 15 minutes. I'm listening.
Hate to question your evidence, please first.
Let the Jews start then, who cares?
Welcome all. I was once a Jew. Tonight I'll argue that Judaism is the most ridiculous religion of all. Judaism gave the world the most successful fantasy stories, claiming them to be fact. The ridiculousness of Judaism revolves mainly around the scriptures and commands that its supposed instigator, Moses, put forward as the word of God. Okay. God built the universe in 6 days, then he needed a rest. There's no talk about what he's done for the billions and billions of years before he created the universe. The earth has a 6,000-year lifespan. It took 5 days to create the earth, and it took just 1 day to create the universe. Infinite matter, infinite time, infinite space.
Yeah, that's how powerful I am.
This is just one aspect of the universe. This is just our Milky Way, and it's got billions and billions of stars in it. And somewhere in amongst that is a little speck that is the Earth. And Judaism and Moses would have you believe that it took 5 days to create this little speck and just 1 day to create that multiplied by billions. Judaism claimed the first and only clone that could change sex, and that was Eve. And it claimed that the original mated with its clone. That's quite a claim. But is it any wonder that humanity might be in trouble? I mean, how could you have any more successful inbreeding than having somebody mate with their clone? Serpents could talk to humans. There was a serpent that talked to Adam and Eve. In the latest story in the Old Testament, there's a fellow called Balaam, and Balaam is spoken to by his donkey. Now, those people that are old enough to know Mr. Ed, there was a talking horse, Mr. Ed, and I wonder whether he's not predicated on this talking horse that Balaam had. Now, God would desire to deny humans knowledge of good and bad. So these Adam and Eve weren't supposed to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. Women would suffer eternally because one woman, Eve, tempted Adam with a piece of fruit. How fair is that? That all you women have to bear children, have menstruation, because this person supposedly offered a tree of fruit. These are ridiculous stories. But it's interesting, isn't it, that, you know, female dogs and female cats and female elephants and all that, they weren't tempted. You know, why do they suffer? Why is it only female humans that suffer? Now, God could live in infinite time and space without food. But then God needed sacrifices of meat and fruit, usually for forgiveness.
And I don't get them anymore. I'm angry.
Burnt offerings to God for atonement was interesting, as God never got to make use of any of the fruit. The clergy usually got to eat it. Burnt offerings, of course, were meat. Fruit wasn't burnt, not because God didn't want burnt fruit, but because the clergy didn't want burnt fruit. Now, had this whole story transpired in, say, Northern Europe, then they might have had cooked chestnuts. They didn't have chestnuts in the Middle East. Now, God protected the murderous Cain, who killed his own brother Abel, yet demanded that people shouldn't kill. It's interesting that God would protect a murderer and condemn murderers of today. There were ramifications for doing anything to this murderous fellow called Cain, and that was that people would be threatened with death to many generations. Now, some other interesting stories that Judaism has delightfully given you, particularly Moses, is that early humans lived for 900 years. Now, can you imagine a family gathering? You know, Noah, for example, lived for 950 years. Now, this is 6 generations of people here. Can you imagine the spread of 950 years? Quite extraordinary. But this God would kill millions of humans, animals, plants, because he was a pathetic creator who couldn't make mankind sufficiently subservient to himself. Apparently, he should be loved, even though he committed mass genocide. Jews would have themselves and half the world believe that Noah sailed in an ark with all the world's animals, all the animal life on board for 11 months. There's no explanation of how he distributed the animals to different parts of the world. But let me tell you, he had himself, his wife, 3 boys and three daughter-in-laws on this boat, and they had all the animals on the earth. Can you imagine feeding them and cleaning up all the crap afterwards? God told Noah, oh, I've given it all away. Going all down the back. Oh, here we go. We're back to the there we go. Put it down. God told Noah that every moving thing was meat for man. Somehow he changed his mind and brought in kosher requirements. So he couldn't have everything that was meat for man. God had a covenant with Abraham and his offspring, then with Moses. The Jews were God's chosen people. And what did he do with his chosen people? He left them in bondage in Egypt, slaves for 430 years. He left them in Babylonian captivity. He had them annihilated in the Roman onslaughts.
Yeah, but I just tested them.
There were various pogroms and Adolf Hitler. Maybe it might have been better if the Jews weren't God's chosen people. Through Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, the people on earth would be blessed. Some of the blessings include cancer, smallpox, tuberculosis, black plague, polio, cholera, yada yada yada, floods, suffering. Blessed indeed. One of the most revered men in Judaism, and for that matter in Christianity and Islam, was a gentleman by the name of Abraham. Abraham was a liar, an enslaver. He had a sex slave. He was a man who denied other people their human rights. He was a thief and an all-round immoral being. He was prepared to risk the lives of others for his own agenda. The other patriarchs of Judaism followed Abraham, such as Isaac, Jacob, and many of the 12 sons of Jacob. Many of them were also murderers, thieves, polygamists, and incestuous. And these were the patriarchs. Abraham's wife, if you can imagine, had her first child at about this age. She was 91 years old. And maybe this is her little baby here. God was a fun character, despite, you know, the grandstanding here from this God. God was a fun character. He asked Abraham to kill and cook his son just to prove that Abraham believed in God. That's fair and reasonable.
That was also a test.
Don't worry about the consequences for the poor child who's about to be carved up and cooked. This despite Abraham being amongst a small handful of people that claimed to have met God. God came to earth and met Abraham, and look what Abraham did for God. He washed his feet. And God didn't hang around for much longer. I'm guessing because Abraham wasn't offering pedicures. And God just chuffed off again. Judaism gave the world tithing. When Jacob asked God for food, Jacob offered that he'd give 10% back. That's a pretty cute little deal. I mean, why didn't he just ask for 90% in the first place? But this led to tithing. And tithing has been a wonderful institution for everybody since. The other thing that Moses would have us believe is that 12 couples, so the 12 sons of Jacob, or known as Israel, the 12 sons of Israel, could outpopulate an Egyptian nation of millions in under 400 years. And what I put to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that the patriarchs from Jacob right through to Moses are only like 4 or 5 generations. So 4 or 5 generations span 400 years, and somehow we're led to believe that there are millions of these Jews, Israelites. People other than the Hebrews were abhorred by God because they weren't subservient to him. Thus it was acceptable to conquer them. God seemingly had failed. He was a failure. He failed to convince them of his magnificence. God directed genocide by the Hebrews of the people inhabiting the promised land, the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, a whole bunch of people. At one stage, God was going to send hornets to drive all these people out of the land of Israel, but seemingly he forgot. So the Israelites had to fight their own battles. Now, Israelites weren't to vex or oppress strangers. However, overrunning and killing those in the way of the Israelites, that was quite acceptable. Taking their women folk was quite acceptable. Another interesting fact, I don't know whether you know, but Moses' mother was around about 129 years older than his father. At the time of Exodus, God could distinguish between an Egyptian and an Israelite. Couldn't distinguish, so he got the Israelites to paint their doorways with the blood of a 1-year-old, unblemished sheep. While the Israelites were in the desert, God generously gave shade to the Israelites, and he gave every 25,714 people, or thereabouts, 1 tree. And that was supposed to shade them. It was a very generous God. In Exodus 15:03, it stated that the Lord is a man of war, and he certainly has produced himself and proven himself to be a man of war. God defined himself as jealous, a quality that humans were not to have. Thou shalt not covet. God was jealous and would not tolerate anyone worshipping other gods. Now it's interesting that he makes that statement because it makes the implication that there were other gods. The first of the 10 Commandments was one of the most despicable acts imaginable. I am the Lord thy God, just as
That's
Thomas
right.
said, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage.
That's right.
What a wonderful man. He was the bastard that put them there in the first place.
I was testing them.
God would persecute generations of offspring because of a misdemeanour by a forebear. So, for example, Noah had a son called Ham. Not a very kosher name, but that was his name. And Ham saw Noah naked. Now, Ham's son would be cursed, Ham's son would be cursed because Ham saw Noah naked. Makes total sense to me. The children, right through to the great-grandchildren of people who had been iniquitous, who transgressed God's edicts or sinned, would be punished. We're talking 4 generations. So I do something wrong, and my great-great-grandchildren have to suffer because I did something wrong. A bastard, if you're a poor bastard, you couldn't enter the congregation of the Israelites for 10 generations. Moses told the Israelites, the Israelites didn't lose faith in God despite being in bondage for 400 years. Now that's real faith. I mean, you're suffering as a slave for 430 years, and you don't lose faith with this God. And then Moses would lead people to believe that he disappears up this Mount Sinai for 40 days, comes back down, and they've all lost faith in him. What a baloney story. When Moses was up on Mount Sinai, he didn't have bread or water for 40 days and nights. Now, of course, there were no witnesses to this claim, and we all know this feat is impossible. But, a lot of us are salesmen, and we know the deal. And the deal is that there's nothing in the fine print that doesn't say that he had pina coladas and croissants. Moses was a murderous thug. Because the golden calf was built, Moses' clergy slew 3,000 men. Now this is the clergy slaughtering 3,000 of their own people, creating thousands of widows and fatherless children. The command not to kill didn't seem to apply to the clergy. At one stage, the Israelites murmured against Moses and Aaron, so God instituted a plague. Moses asked Aaron to make an atonement for the people, but before he could do that, 14,700 Israelites died. At one stage, 250 princes challenged Moses and said, "Hey, why can't we be involved in this deal?" And these 250 princes were swallowed up by the earth, and fire consumed them. At one stage, Israelite men got involved with Moabite women. Moses decapitated them and put their heads in the sun so that God wouldn't be angry with the Israelites.
You have 2 more minutes for your offences, Jew.
One of the clergy's sons appeared an Israelite man and his Midianitish woman. One man speared an Israelite man and Midianitish woman through their bellies because they mixed. Moses' henchmen killed 24,000 Israelite men who had been seduced. This is Moses' anger. By Midianitish women. The Israelites then annihilated the Midianitish women. However, Moses' army were then allowed to take 34,000 virgin Midianites for their own pleasure, whilst non-virgins were killed. The Israelite gynecologists, you could just imagine, were very busy performing vaginal investigations. The Israelites had to contribute gold, silver, brass and various other items to the clergy to build the Ark of the Covenant. You know about this very wealthy ark. And the clergy was the tribe of Moses. They controlled the Ark of the Covenant, the greatest collection of wealth that the Israelites had. So if things went belly up, no problem, the clergy just took off with the dough. God described the building of this expensive ark in a significant portion of 12 of the 40 chapters of Exodus. Now just keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, to build this ark needs that much description, but to build the universe, one day. Moses, now here's some fun stuff. Moses sprinkled stale coagulating blood over 1.7 million people. Quite a spectacle. The clergy put animal blood on the horns of the altar and then poured blood around the altars to God. Blood was also placed on the tip of Aaron and his son's ears, thumbs and big toes, and then at different times sprinkled on Aaron and his sons. Aaron was the accomplice to Moses. Aaron and his sons would wave dead meat in the air as a wave offering to God. Can you imagine these guys standing around waving dead meat to God? The meat was then burnt and was an offering to God. This process made them holy. Bloody holy, in my view.
Your time is up. Carry on your offences.
In nomine Patre et Filii et Spiritus Sancto. Let us pray. Amen. Thank you. Sorry, force of habit in front of this many people. I better put my slides on. Hang on a sec. No, it won't be in Latin, sorry. It'll be in the Vulgar. So Christianity is, of course, more ridiculous than all other religions. Sure, we know religions are pretty crazy, all of us are here, of course. If it isn't a volcano-burying, nuclear bomb detonating aliens, it's being slain, well, giants being slain and turned into land, or children being born from a frothy part of the genitalia that's been cast into the sea. Whereas Christianity, well, it's a benevolent zombie that's been brought to earth for all of us. Yeah, that's going to really happen. Anyway, my opponents will surely say that their ex-religion is the most ridiculous, but I'm sorry, they can't compete. Judaism came before Christianity, and all of Judaism's craziness with the Old Testament has been inherited and enhanced by Christianity. We made it better. Muslims, Islam, they're the new kid on the block. They try and take it a little bit too far, I think. They're just maybe just trying too hard, possibly. Plus, how can you compete with the idea of a trinity? Something that's so complex and so disturbing. I couldn't even understand it when I was a believer. And a lot of Christian religions have just gotten rid of it because they're just too confusing. There's been innumerable tomes written on it by Catholics, and they don't even understand it, I don't think. This is the best I've seen, but good luck. Anyway, a lot of Christian religions have removed that idea. They've retconned it, which is a word they use in fiction, retroactive continuity, where they basically go back and rewrite history. Islam has also abandoned this idea. It's just too confusing. I actually had a desire when I was younger to be a priest. So what I'm wearing right now is something I actually wanted to do, hence the crossy stuff. I went to Edinburgh College, and the priest that was there, who I applied to go into seminary, advised me that I should get some life experience before I did, and that's probably why I'm here, so we should all thank him. But I gave up Christianity just simply due to the logical inconsistencies of an omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, omnibenevolent deity that somehow still allows evil to exist. This made me realise that Christianity was ridiculous. That and that all the faiths, well, all the Christian faiths at least, completely contradict each other. They actually, some of them actually say that they are wrong. We are the one true Catholic Church, is what a lot of Catholics will say very succinctly during the prayer. So that's why I simply don't do it. Christians can't even agree with each other. As I said, there's thousands of Christian faiths. Possibly at last count anywhere between 10 and 30,000, or if you believe as some people do, there's 2.1 billion, because every single Christian has their own version because they have to dismiss stuff they don't agree with in their doctrine. Stuff like transubstantiation, which if you talk to any Catholic, most of them won't even know what it is. If they do, they'll wishy-washily agree with it. Sorry, this is where I was. Sure, in Islam there's the Sunnis and the Shias and a few others. In Judaism there's the Karaites and the Orthodox, but they just can't compete with this sheer number. And look, that's exactly where someone is, and they're right, obviously, as they said. There's actually a interesting test that I found online which will tell you which church you should try out. Interestingly enough, it brought me up as a unity church, not a Unitarian Universalist, which are a little bit atheist. Unity churches don't believe in the Trinity, like I mentioned before, and they're a little bit more liberal, but they do believe in God and they do believe in spiritual healing, which is anyway. Some of the denominations try and follow the laws of the Old Testament. Some don't. Some disagree on minor differences, such as which days of the week to worship and who's the boss and which superpowers he has. Some, like the Mormons, who will consider themselves Christian, a lot of other Christians won't. Christians kind of consider them like the unwanted stepchild, I guess. With other Christians announcing their crazy beliefs. But really, is it any crazier to believe that after Jesus was born of a virgin and died on a cross and came back to life magically, he then ascended eventually into heaven, flew to America and spread the good word to the lost tribe of Israel? It's not that much of a stretch from the other bit, really. And besides, it's really just biblical fan fiction. And can you blame them? The crazy groundwork was already laid out. Steve actually touched on how violent the Old Testament was, and it was very violent, but I think the Christians did one better with the invention of hell. Some Christians don't believe in hell. Others, that we're living there right now, and only through faith. No good works. No combination. No, sorry, it's written and you can't do anything about it. See, they don't agree. But only through those things can you get out of hell and go to heaven. They can't even agree on the rules of the game, so how are we meant to play? And don't forget, Jesus was sent to save us from hell. The hell that he introduced, because it wasn't in the Old Testament, it was only Sheol. And Sheol really doesn't compare, it's just a waiting. It's not the 9 layers of hell that you see there. Sure, the Muslim hell is supposedly worse, but again, they're trying too hard. Decide which one is more ridiculous. The one that came up with the idea of hell, or the one that expanded on the theme and made it a little bit more violent? There is even some evidence that the Christian hell introduced other religions. The Nordic religion didn't have an idea of hell until the Christians came in and they had heck. So hell from Christianity managed to invade a religion that had the almighty Thor. That's how crazy and ridiculous Christianity is. Anyway, back to hell myths. The Christian idea of hell didn't even fully come from the Bible. It came from two works of known fiction, Dante's Inferno and A Paradise Lost. The verses in the Bible are very vague and only talk of fire and pain, nothing more than the levels or anything along those lines. And it does talk a little bit about a zombie and a worm, but really the zombie's Jesus and worms are underground. Good luck. The levels of hell are for different sinners, and as you can see there, I've quickly jotted them out, but you can find that online anyway. Dante's Inferno is not a very good read, so I wouldn't bother. Even Satan really isn't in charge. He and his angels that rebelled were prisoners too. He was only able to tempt Jesus and the rest of us with a whisper of hell, like some creepy Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars. Makes it interesting, doesn't it, to think that God is their jailer and somehow they're able to get out and communicate with us. Doesn't make him a very good jailer. Even us fallible humans are able to find mobile phones and steal them off prisoners. We don't let them communicate with the outside world. The claim that hell is out of God's sight has been bandied around a lot, especially by Catholics. But if it's out of his sight, then he's not omniscient, and he's not omnipotent because he can't see in there.
I am almighty.
Unless he decides to put that place out of his sight and out of his power, which is actually, most of us would probably agree, is condoning the act of torture for all eternity for simply stealing a loaf of bread. Other religions have basically designated hell as God's dungeon. He's still in charge, and he can let people out if he wants, but he leaves them there for all eternity. Joseph Fritz will eat your heart out. Some Christian traditions have removed the idea of hell. One Catholic priest recently in the UK said that it was just a fairy tale to scare people and make them toe the line. That's another point of contention though. Once you're sentenced, some denominations say that you can get out, some say that you can't. A lot of Anglicans agree with us atheists, as I said, and believe that hell doesn't exist. But there is an interesting argument. Supposedly Satan fell from heaven to hell. God cast him out. If you can fall from heaven to hell and not get out, as Satan hasn't, then given enough time, everyone will fall from heaven to hell. And thus, if heaven is outside of time, heaven is currently unoccupied. Everyone's in. But continuing on anyway. There are some other afterlife destinations that Christians will talk about. There's limbo. Not that one, but close enough. Which is hell adjacent, split into various sections again, mainly for those who die unbaptised, but not evil enough to be condemned to hell. So unbaptised infants and fetuses that died before birth. Yet the Church of England recently decided to retcon, and removed it from their doctrine, that limbo exists. And they had a lot of tearful pleas from adherents who had come to terms with their child being in limbo. And limbo no longer existed, so their child. It's a rather sad in an odd sort of way. Next we've got...
So, Peter, where should we go for your week off?
Well, I was thinking we could all go to Purgatory like we did last year.
This isn't bad. It's not that good, but yeah, it's not that bad.
It's so-so. Yeah, more or less.
So Purgatory is heaven adjacent. It's basically the celestial waiting room where you wait around until you're good enough to get let into heaven. And that's the Club Med destination in the sky, which we should next talk about. We had the same issue with heaven as we have with hell. Different Christian religions have different takes. Catholics claim that you have to be the perfect saint to get into heaven. I was taught during my catechism that you remain in purgatory until the end of time, and then you're judged and get into heaven. So you remain in purgatory for thousands of years. But the catechism is fairly vague on this point, and it does seem to allude to the fact that you could be deemed a saint by God without the need for canonisation. It's very rare that a religious text would be as hard to read as a horoscope, but there you go. Sorry, that was sarcasm. Doesn't portray well. Then there is what you'll be like in heaven, without sin or an urge to sin, maybe even becoming a full-blown psychopath as you look down on your family, friends and children in hell for entertainment, as one philosopher said Tertullian in 155 AD. Then there are the other denominations of Christians that say only a relatively small number of us are actually going to get into heaven. 144,000 has been bandied around. The rest kick around till the end of days and then get brought back to earth in a new body, just like the Jews believe will happen when the Messiah comes back. They stole that too and made it better. By the way, these 144,000, none of them are in this room. They're already dead, according to most of the ones that believe that. So we're not going to heaven, none of us, according to them anyway. I was really disappointed when I found that out. On to some more biblical specifics of heaven. Yeah, it isn't a 24/7 party like you were led to believe. You don't get to meet loved ones realistically, as a lot of Christians are led to believe. According to the Bible, according to the scriptures, it's realistically just a room where you worship God. According to Jesus actually only says one time about heaven. He talks about his Father having many rooms in their house and then being together with him in paradise. He's just being there to show off more than anything there. Paul says that Jesus will be seated at God's right hand, and then in some would say the certifiably insane book of Revelation, which only we have. They say that God will be seated at the centre, and around him will be the 12 judges of Israel, all worshipping him with words. Around him will be the seraphim, protected by their wings, because you can't view them because you'll burst into flames. Your soul will burst into flames, not your body. Around them there's 24 elders seated on thrones, chanting praise to the Lord, saying, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." There you go. And then in torturous round, everyone else who's gone to heaven, every soul will sit around this spectacle and chant something completely different. They will chant, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise, honour and glory forever and ever." Sounds like a blast. I wonder how many suicides actually get in heaven.
No one.
Then, of course, the aforementioned proto-Christian Mormons, who, if they are really good Mormons, will get their own planet to rule over as God. I want to know who gets the hellish Venus or the frigid Pluto. But you only get that if you tithe. They've actually got that in their doctrine, which is really smart. You're looking out for the money for them, so that's good. But you do still get to go to heaven if you follow Moses' law as you two used to. So you would have gone to a lower heaven where you don't get to rule your own planet, but it's still paradise. The rest of us, if we're good, get to go to the lowest heaven. So we're all good. That's fine.
You still have the chance to get promoted.
Yeah, okay, really, there you go. Post-mortem baptism, I hear, that happens, yeah. Catholics even argue at the highest levels on who can get in. Is it due to your good deeds, as the Pope has claimed recently, or an atheist can get there, as he said, or is, as one of his later cardinals corrected, no, you actually have to believe. So it seems they can't even agree on the rules of heaven either. So we really can't play this game. On to something else quickly before I finish.
You have 2 minutes for your offences.
Sure, there is some violence done in my opponent's ex-religions, but they both completely pale in comparison to the violence that's been done in the name of Christianity. Catholicism alone has killed 50 million people. 50 million people during the Spanish Inquisition, witch hunts, 15 million alone in South America, the South American Indians, and 7 to 12 million in the 30 Years' War. Plus there was also harbouring of Nazis, the Nazis themselves, not to mention the Crusades from the 11th to 13th century, 15th century Crusade, getting Nazis out of Germany after World War I. You're welcome.
Yeah, God has a German accent.
Yeah, I noticed. Remember what, and also to this day, the witches that are punished in Africa. Remember what Hitchens said a while ago about Christianity, not about Islam or Judaism. Remember what they did when they were in power. Islam has a little bit of power now, and it's flexing its muscles. But Christianity had power for hundreds of years and had a lot more unfettered practice at their power. The Vatican and most fundamentalist Christians also espouse opinions on demons and exorcisms. They believe in witchcraft and magic and telling the future, demons including funneling him into pigs and talking snakes and donkeys, which Steve already touched on, which is excellent. Besides, neither of my colleagues' ex-religions have the divine actually sacrificing himself to appease himself. Think about the utter absurdity of that for a second. Add to that the Catholic doctrine of the wafer and the plonk, got mine over there, which will become the literal body and blood, and you have one absolute LSD-induced, absolutely ridiculous belief system. The mythos around Christianity is certainly extensive. There are angels. There's a seraphim from before. That's a cherubim. They're beautiful, aren't they? They have angels, witches, demons. That's Krampus. Look them up later. It's hilarious. Witches and devils. And then there are things that actually exist that have as much effectiveness as those. We've got our monks, brothers, sisters, priests, bishops, cardinals, archbishops, pastors, and lay priests. Not what you think, but
Your time is up, Christian.
really? Okay. Just to finish off quickly, Islam and Judaism have their crazy leaders, but none that can compare with the magic smoke appointed infallible leader of the Pope. What is the phrase his own boss supposedly said while on earth? It is easy for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. Yet popes get sainted all the time. Thus, under the rules of their religion, are free to...
Finish it, Christian.
Okay. So peace be with you, my brothers, sisters, trans and intersex. But fuck the Pope.
Now, Muslim, what do you have to say?
I'll leave that one up because I don't have any slides, so I'm just gonna talk. I don't think I need any slides, to be honest. And the reason is the fantastic thing of being a Muslim, or an ex-Muslim rather, is that I almost accept everything they have said. So they have done all my work. So I accept Abraham was a thug and Moses was a liar. And the only thing Islam does is it basically fulfills the Arab dream. So in the history of Abrahamic religion, what Arabs felt, in my opinion, is that they're missing from the whole history of the Abrahamic religion and the evolution of their belief system. So the way they try to tackle it is the easiest way, which is we accept everything Abraham said, we accept almost everything Moses said, and we also accept everything almost Jesus said. What you're going to do is you're going to improve it, and we're going to make it even more ridiculous. And the best way to do it, where do we start? I mean, it's so ridiculous, I often struggle, where do we start? But let's start right at the beginning in that cave where Archangel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad, who was meditating or fasting. And Archangel Gabriel said to Muhammad, read, to a person who cannot read, who replied back 3 times, so, I don't know how to read. And then 4th time he said, what do you want me to read? And Gabriel says, read in the name of your Lord, who created you from a clot of blood. Now, the story itself is obviously unfalsifiable. You cannot tell whether it actually happened or not, but you have to accept it because that's where it started. And then from there, if you follow the story, they claim Quran is the most perfect word of God. Now, I have noticed that Jews don't really claim that. And Christians, I noticed they have many different versions of their truth, many different Bibles. Muslims manage to retain their ridiculousness at least in one version, and that what they call is the perfect word of God. Now, if you look at the evolution of Quran, by the way, let me spell it out a little bit. I know most of you already know it, but the fact that they call it the perfect word of God, if you look at the history of how Quran was composed and compiled, I mean, when Muhammad passed away, there was no Quran. There were verses that people memorized who were getting killed in various campaigns that they are going after, trying to conquer foreign lands. So people who memorized different verses of Quran were getting killed. Then Abu Bakr thought, you know what, maybe we're onto something, we need to try to record it somehow. So by the time they get to Uthman, who is the fourth caliph, many years have already gone past. There are many different versions of Quran which Uthman ordered to be burned, and he canonized what we now call the current version of Quran. The funny thing is, though, Quran in 7th century, which they call at that time, obviously it was written in Arabic or composed in Arabic, but Arabic at today's form didn't really get the full form of vowel and consonants until about 9th century. So the perfect word of God has many different interpretations among Muslims themselves. It's still the same text, but it got different interpretation based on how it's pronounced, which vowel and consonant are used. So the perfect word of God, you often hear it, and it's unalterable, unchallenged, unchanged, and it was revealed to a person who couldn't read or write. To me, that's the most ridiculous of all claims, but that's just a start. Now, where do I go? Next, let's talk about Islamic voodoo. Now, not everything Muslims believe are available in Quran, though. I mean, it's not really a big book. There are many secondary texts like hadith or oral tradition and so forth, where you find most of the funny stuff, entertaining stuff. For example, do you know that almost every Muslim believes in an entity they call jinns or demons? Perhaps the difference between demons and jinns are that there are good jinns and there are bad jinns. It spells Jinns. And if you get sick, I got a slide here of various books that you can get. If you get sick, there are all sorts of jinn healing that you can do to yourself, because most Muslims believe that if you get sick, it's because of the bad spirit, the evil jinn who possessed you. So if you got a headache, for example, it's because some jinn has possessed you. Now, many educated Muslims do not really believe in their day-to-day lives that jinns exist and they influence their everyday sickness and things like that. However, if you dig them, if you start talking to them, most of them, they do say that they believe in these unseen realm jinns who walk around amongst us, but we can't see them. And that's very common among even educated Muslims. And that to me is very ridiculous.
And they have hooves.
Sir?
Hooves.
Yes, hooves as well, yes. And of course there are many angels. You got two angels, one on your right shoulder, one on your left. The one on your left is always documenting what you're doing bad, and the right on your right is always documenting anything you're doing good. And you'll be measured in the day of the judgment. And they're the librarians who are actually documenting everything you do and everything you say. Quickly going to move on to a few more ridiculous stuff. Splitting of the moon, a common belief among Muslims. Prophet Muhammad split the moon in half. And not only that, they also strongly believe that Neil Armstrong, secret Muslim, he went to moon and he heard Adhan, which is the Muslim prayer, and he saw moon split in two, and he converted into Islam. And when he came back, he was not allowed to speak, and that's why he never appeared in any interviews, because he became a secret Muslim. Just Google it. There are literally millions of educated Muslims believe it. I believed it when I was a Muslim, because that's my teacher said in school. So, splitting of the moon is a very common belief among Muslims. There are a whole lot of images in the web, you can look it up. Moon is obviously billions of years old, and it got a whole lot of craters and marks and whatnot. and they come up with these images, and they say it's basically the mark of prophet splitting the moon. The story of splitting the moon is, here's an image of the prophet. I hope no one will get offended. So basically, prophet is here trying to convert the infidels.
I am offended.
I found your picture. Trying to convert the infidels, and the infidels are basically saying, "Oh, we're not very impressed. I mean, whatever you're reciting sounds like poetry to us. We've got better poets." And then he apparently performed a miracle of splitting the moon. It's very common belief. But I think the most ridiculous of all, actually there are more, but most ridiculous of all, and I don't know which one is, better than the previous one. The flight to the heaven. It's a very common belief. It's called mirage, not mirage as in illusion, but mirage, M-I-R-A-J. Basically it means that when Muhammad, one night he was visited by Gabriel, and he was offered a trip to heaven, seventh heaven, where Allah presumably lives or stays or whatever, and a beautiful creature, looks almost like a flying horse, face like a female, human being, and then the rest of the body looks like a donkey or horse. They call this creature Barak, who came to take the prophet to the seventh heaven. And when the prophet went to the heaven, sorry I don't have the slides, but basically these are all Persian paintings of the prophet. You can look them up. So when prophet went to heaven, he met all the big four guys. He met Moses, he met Abraham, he met Jesus, he even met Adam. And all of them, they congratulated him as the last and final prophet, and how impressed they are, and they exchanged, pleasantries. And then Allah said, "Oh, you're going to worship me 50 times a day." And then Muhammad started to bargain with him because 50 times is a bit too much. And then after going back and forth a number of times, he reduced it down to 5 times a day.
Yeah, usually I don't negotiate.
Yeah, well, thank you. 5 times a day. It's very nice of you, but it's starting very early in the morning and until the late at night. You're gonna pray 5 times a day, and if you miss one prayer, then when you go to the grave, there's gonna be a whole lot of elaborate torture. So yes, and that brings me to hell. Muhammad also visited hell when he went to seventh heaven. This is Gabriel. Took Muhammad in his funny chariot. There's hell, and when Muhammad came back, he said, "When I went to hell, most of the inhabitants of hell were women." That's a very
But I'm not virgins. Virgins don't go to hell.
They were hanging by their breasts.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm not going to describe it, but you can look it up. So basically, it's something Muslims do repeat a lot of times, that most of the inhabitants of hell are women, and that's basically, we'll get into that in a minute, but Islam's treatment of women is quite horrendous. Let's change topic. Let's look at Kaaba, the black cube that Muslims circle once a year. The story of that is quite fascinating. It's basically a squarish structure. There's nothing in it. Used to be all sorts of pagan deities who obviously were eliminated when Islam conquered the pagan and polytheistic Arab. And just like we always embrace our predecessors, we embraced Jewish tradition. We circumcised, we care about halal and all sorts of things, and we also respect Jesus as an important prophet.
And you all believe in me.
And we also, of course, believe in the great white man on the sky. We also accepted, we thought, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's a square box that everyone comes once a year, they circle around it, and it's good business. So all we need to do is just throw the idols out and, just change the logo under new management. It's just easy. Now, in Kaaba though, if you look at the eastern corner, there's a curious structure. It looks like this. Don't tell me it looks familiar, but it looks like this. If they call it the black stone. Now, it reminds me of something, but basically this is a structure Muslims go and kiss, and that's a tradition from the pagan days. They call it the black stone. Apparently it's a stone that came from heaven, which is true because it's a meteorite. And apparently this is the stone which Adam used to build the structure of Kaaba. Do you remember?
From here it looks like a vagina.
There's a reason they kiss it. Now, what happens is that this actually is from Islam's pagan origin. So it is a vulva. It's basically a pagan symbol of fertility, femininity, whatever you want to call it. They retained it because they believed that Abraham or Adam used it to build Kaaba, which I find utterly ridiculous. Whereas Muhammad, there's a dispute about who's going to transfer the stone from one end of the Kaaba to the other end during a reconstruction back in Muhammad's days. Here's Muhammad trying to resolve their dispute. You can look up people going to that structure and kissing during their yearly pilgrimage. Yeah, it's interesting. That brings me to sexuality in Islam. Now that in itself needs the whole night of discussion. So I'm going to just go through them like bullet points. Some of these examples are from Hadith, which are the oral tradition and the written tradition of the doings and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. So this is what Muhammad's saying to one of his disciples. So they're returning from jihad. So jihad's over, they're returning back home, and the guy on his camel, he's just rushing to get home. And Muhammad asked, why are you rushing to get home? And he's like, oh, I got a new wed wife. And he said, you must give your wife enough time. Wife must shave pubic hair if husband returns home at night after a long journey. Sahih Bukhari, volume 7, book 62, number 173. Look it up. The Muslims believe this is one of the most authentic. I could have picked any random, sexually obsessed, stories, but I thought I'm just going to pick a stupid one because it's ridiculous. I'm just going to...
You have 2 minutes, Muslim.
One night stand, muta marriage. If anyone is familiar with the Shiites marriage, God, you are so generous. So what God gave to Shiites, if you are attracted to someone and you just want to have a one night stand, it's allowed actually in Shia marriage. It's called muta, so you can marry for one night and you can divorce the next morning.
It's only allowed for the man. The woman is a sinner.
Yeah. Muhammad also believed and also supported that you can have sex with your captives whom you have captured in jihad. Slaves are okay to have sex with as well. Masturbation is bad, by the way. And if you masturbate, you're gonna end up, in the day of judgment, your hand gonna explode like a pregnant woman's belly. It says in Hadith. I don't think that's gonna stop anyone really. Homosexuality is bad. It's not scary enough. Bestiality obviously need to be there because you need to have instructions for goat herders and camel herders and people like that, otherwise they're going to do all sorts of stuff. So it says very simple, kill the offender as well as the poor animal. Now there's been a bit of a dispute between whether or not you can eat the meat of the animal. One school of thought says the meat of the animal is halal. Other school of Muslim scholars, they say no, the animal is also haram because it participated in the sin. Last but not least, it's important. If during intercourse the man reaches climax but the woman doesn't, common problem I assume, this is what you need to do. And I'm reading verbatim. Ubay ibn Ka'b reported, I asked the messenger of Allah, may peace be upon him, about a man who has sexual intercourse with his wife but leaves her before orgasm. Upon this, he, the Holy Prophet, said, he should wash the secretion of his wife and then perform ablution and offer prayer. Sahih Muslim, Book 3, number 677. That's not going to help. I mean, that's not going to save your marriage. All right, my time is up. I'll come back. Thank you.
Now is the time to ask each of our sinners if you have any questions, starting with our Jewish sinner. Yes.
Why take any of those books literally and seriously? People don't.
Because we wanted to entertain a good number of people.
A lot of Christians do take it literally, though.
A lot of
The
Jews take it.
fundamentalists.
Aren't they allegories, really?
In our minds, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
And how dare you oppose God? I mean, he moves in mysterious ways.
That's right.
How can we be humans, even remotely understand?
Yeah, you will never understand me.
It's the accent.
Yeah, that's right.
Stick out!
Yes.
Yeah, you have some very precise numbers that I haven't heard before. So I'd be
Me?
Yeah,
Oh, good.
I'd be curious, like some of your numbers where you have.
Thank you very much. Let me explain.
I mean, like 91 years old for someone's wife, or this many million.
Yeah. No, it's all there. It's all there. But the
not those numbers.
not 91 is yeah. You do your calculations. It comes out at 91.
So you
But
calculated that.
I either calculate it or it's there verbatim. The best one, King James 6. You know, it's the one that's the most long-lasting.
Factual errors. I mean, I don't have a choice here.
Yeah.
But in your presentation, there were a lot of factual.
Let me tell you about the 25,174 people that sit under the one tree. There were 600,000 Israelite men that came out of Egypt. So, and you have to keep in. I'm sorry? No, it actually says that.
It says 600,000.
600,000.
So if I look at the King James Bible tonight,
600,000.
exactly 600,000.
600,000, right.
Swear.
On the Bible. It's got 600,000. So okay. Now, you've got to keep in mind that the Egyptians were slaying the firstborn male children, and they were doing that for some time before Moses came around and some time after Moses was around. So you've got to assume that there aren't a whole lot of guys around, yeah? Plenty of women, but not a lot of guys. So my calculations were along the lines of the average life expectancy of a person of that age, and I generously said that was about 50. May not have been that. Then you extrapolate how many children there would have been, how many women there would have been without men, and I came up with a figure of 1.7 million. Now, you know, were there 1.7 million Jews around, Israelites around there at the time? I don't know. That's the figure I've come up with.
What does God say to that?
It's all lies. It's all lies. Any further questions? Any question for our Christian sinner?
Do you have gluten-free body of Jesus?
It doesn't have yeast, because the Catholics don't have yeast. It depends which denomination you go for. No?
So I have got a question. You talked about some of this conflict amongst different Christian faiths about transubstantiation.
Correct.
Can you just expand on that?
So Catholics...
Who believes and who doesn't believe it?
It's only Catholics.
Oh, is that
To be
right?
a Catholic, you have to accept that the body and blood of Christ literally during the ceremony become the literal body and blood of Christ, as Rodney Dangerfield said after the first time he had it.
It's kind of like organised animals, really.
Yes.
But where does that sort sort of come out from the Bible? How do the other guys sort of
Catholics
say
don't follow the Bible, they follow the Catechism. Completely different.
So where's it come from?
Catechism. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is written by the popes.
It comes from the Bible. It's in the New Testament.
Yeah, he says, this is my body, take it and drink.
No, there's a particular part where he's talking with his followers, and his followers say, he said, this is my body and blood, and they say, you don't actually genuinely believe that, do you? I mean, that's what he says. And the Bible doesn't say the followers couldn't believe that and some of them left. So it's actually quite different place.
Is it another ego? I can't remember reading it. But a lot of other faiths, well, the majority of other Christian faiths discard it and say it's just allegory. Even your fundamentalist Christians don't believe that it's literally the body and blood of Christ.
Well, the Orthodox do.
Sorry?
The Orthodox do.
Yeah, the Catholics do.
No, the Orthodox.
The Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox. Yeah, but they're Catholic-esque. Different boss. Different superpowers.
So you mentioned the eye of the needle, correct?
The what? Sorry?
Eye of the needle?
Yes, rich man could
No,
not.
that's actually a real place.
Oh yeah, I do remember reading this.
You're taking allegory. It's actually that's one of those things that's theoretically metaphorical, but it's not. It's a real place that's called the Eye of the Needle.
Yeah, but
it's very difficult for camels and donkeys to get through.
Yeah, well,
so when they say that, they're saying it's quite difficult
for a rich man to get into heaven.
Narrow path.
And then I showed.
But it can be done.
Then I showed Pope Benedict sitting on a solid gold throne, didn't I? So it's very difficult for him to get into heaven, I would imagine, unless he's living on $2.50 a day, like 3 billion people in the world are currently. I doubt it.
Yes.
It's a vague question. I can't answer, but
Yep.
if you don't believe in God, what do you believe in, like, how the earth came about and, like, how everything's running, stuff like that?
Look up modern cosmology. Yeah, aggregation of matter around a star. There's evidence for it, so yes. Background radiation, cosmic microwave, have a look. There's lots of evidence for it.
Yeah, but the world is 6,000 years old, you know that.
Just a question following on from that. A good point I think which atheists struggle with is how do you actually go on and say that this is how the universe came about, but how do you go about proving like claims that human beings are important? People who are theists don't understand why they can actually justify why human beings are important because they can base the value of human beings on a God who has created them. Atheists have the difficulty of actually showing why human beings are important in a world that's created through some random explosion and human beings involved.
We're not important. We're not important. There are far more important things than us.
Most atheists don't think that. Most atheists actually think human beings are important.
No, we're not. We're in most secular theologies, no secular philosophies.
We're in. May I say something? May I say something? We might be important in our own minds, but we're not important.
We have higher brain cortex. All we have higher brain cortex.
Only I am important.
Distinguishable from any other mammal, really.
Let's have a quick show of hands. Atheists that think that humans are so important, or the ones that do. Any hands? No.
I think we're important.
Stop it.
It's all over the place.
Guys, if you'd like to have a personal conversation with an atheist, you're very welcome to. We're here for a different purpose. So we might have a break now, and you can engage any of the atheists that are here, and you're welcome to it. Have a break, gentlemen. Sorry, one more question.
You were quoted to the King James New Testament as a Jew. Sure, you don't recognise it.
I don't recognise any theological text.
All right, well, why quote, though, basically a modern document in an archaic background?
Because it's the biblical text that's recognised for the longest period of time by the greatest number of people, in my view.
That's opportunism, though.
Listen, there's a heap of texts that I could have gone through, and I've gone through. Just for your information, I've been through the Old Testament, I've been through the New Testament, I've been through the Quran. I've gone with ones that have been available to me. That, to my mind, has been the most recognisable one. The Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, whatever you like, have recognised different ones. They've changed the wording, whatever you like. But the one that's the original, short of going to Latin versions, which I don't understand, was the King James.
Are we going to vote?
Oh no, there's still more to come. We're going to have a little break now, 15-minute break, and then we've got another 12 minutes each, and then I think voting could be dangerous.
There are even more offences.
What about questions for our Muslim ex-Muslims?
Well, if we can cut the religious stuff there for a moment, that we don't have a theism-atheism debate right now, then yes, please do.
Questions?
Why are Sunnis killing Shia and Shia killing Sunnis in Syria?
Okay, well, let's just answer the first part, which is why Sunnis kill Shias generally and why Shias kill Sunnis generally, and Syria, we'll probably get into that in a second. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
They're killing each other because I want to have some fun, you know.
That's a good reason. On top of that, the historical reason is when Muhammad died, if you compare Muhammad's life with Jesus, Jesus was just a hippie who got crucified, basically. But Muhammad, he was a political person. He was a religious person. He was a leader. He was a number of things in one. And when he passed away, it was really abrupt and strange that he didn't leave any specific, I guess, leader who would lead this campaign going forward when he died. So there was big dispute between various factions of Muslims. Some claimed, oh, I'm from the bloodline of the Prophet, so therefore, I should be the caliph. The others said, it doesn't matter which bloodline you are from, therefore the righteous person should be the leader, and so forth. And that fight continues on and on. And the theology is also very different. Now it's obviously, beyond doubt that at least one of them got it wrong, and they're each convinced that the other got it wrong. And it's just like Catholic versus Protestant, they love to kill each other. Now in Syria, there are other political reasons, of course, but let's not ignore the elephant in the room, which is religion. To each, the other is a heretic, basically. I can't answer specifically why they're doing it in Syria, but they generally do it everywhere. Even in Iraq and Iran, and they hate each other because their doctrines are different, their belief systems are different. The Shias are waiting for their Messiah, the 12th Imam. So are the Sunnis, but the Sunnis a bit of a different interpretation. What the Imam going to do when he comes and who the Imam going to be. Many Shias believe the Imam is already here. He is the hidden Imam. He is the hidden Messiah. Even Ahmed believes that hidden Messiah is already there somewhere. And he's going to come and rescue Muslims and convert everyone into Islam. Which version, I don't know. Presumably Shia version. Sorry, that was not a direct answer to your question.
One more question?
I've actually heard, I'm not sure how true this is, actually travels is not thou shalt not kill, it's thou shalt not murder. Which means you can kill when it's allowed. Hence why you can kill other people, because they're not humans. They're enemies of the state, well, therefore that's not killing. Murdering is murdering someone who's, you can't literally kill that, killing your brother or your father. But slaying a tribe that's not your family, that's blowing game.
19th century apologetics for America for why they could enslave blacks because they weren't human.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
fine. Yeah.
So I believe that was actually, that shall not murder.
It's just apologetics.
Killing's fine.
Yeah.
I just make some exemptions so that I can have some fun. Let's have a break. Now our little sinners here will have their second round of offences against me. Who would like to start? Jew, continue.
Okay, we've only heard the first half of the story. There's a little bit more to come. I'm just going to continue going through point by point as to why Judaism's ridiculous. Moses had the Israelites believe that God would forgive people either through various sacrifices or with a Day of Atonement. This was because God was not actually doing anything if they transgressed Moses' laws or dictates. Thus, Moses would have them think that God was forgiving, rather than them realise that because he didn't exist, he wasn't going to do anything about their transgressions. Now, this God is particularly sexist, as he's indicated he is. A mother who gave birth to a little boy was unclean for 7 days, unclean, and required 33 days of purifying, in which time she wouldn't be allowed to touch anything holy or go to a sanctuary.
And she's not a virgin anymore.
When a mother, when a mother had a female child, when a mother had a female child, she was unclean for double that time, 14 days, and she had to go through 66 days of purifying. Either way, her purifying time, when she'd finished her purifying time, she'd have to make a burnt and sin offering of a young lamb, a pigeon, a turtle dove to the priest. The priest would make atonement for the mother, who would thus be cleansed from the issue of her blood, as though giving birth was a terrible thing. If a person was cleared of leprosy, then the law of the leper would apply. The person would need to be cleansed by the clergy, taking 2 cleansed birds, nice clean birds, some cedar wood and some hyssop. One of the birds would be killed, with the living bird and the hyssop and the scarlet being dipped in the blood of the dead bird. The concoction would then be sprinkled on the leper 7 times, and the live bird would be released. A house that a leper occupied would also have to have the same concoction sprinkled around inside. A witch was to be killed, and I'll come to that a little bit later. Yet what was this other than witchcraft? The surviving leper, if he made it that far, had to give the clergy a trespass offering, a wave offering, a sin offering, and a burnt offering. The clergy did pretty well out of all this. And there's a gentleman here making atonement with his dead birds. I'm only kidding. Oh yes. For a male with a genital infection, the clergy would kill 4 birds to atone for their affliction. So you can see this man's head dipped, and he's ready to atone with his birds. If a man had an adulterous relationship with a bondmaid, should be lashed. He would have to pay the clergy a ram. That seems fair. A man who lay with his mother, stepmother, daughter or daughter-in-law, as well as these women, would be killed seemingly regardless of the circumstances. These rules didn't apply to leaders such as Lot and Reuben, the father of one of the Israelite tribes who was involved in this sort of caper. If a man lay with his mother and his mother-in-law, in other words, a ménage à trois, they would all be burned. If any person lay with a beast, and Hossein touched on this earlier, but it's the same in Judaism, so Mohammed was fairly unoriginal here, but if a man lay with a beast, both of them would be killed. There was no defence for the poor raped animal. And here is here's Daisy. Right suspect. A man and a woman who lay with one another, either whilst menstruating or within 7 days of menstruating, would be exiled. Now you just have to understand, these Israelites are out in the desert, there's nobody around, nothing. 6 days, 1 day too early, and on 6th day they have sex, well, they're gone. Finished. The clergy were only to marry virgins. However, when they lost their own wives, well, it's okay for them, not to be virgins. The daughter of clergy who had a dalliance out of wedlock would be burnt Surprisingly, sons of clergy who did the same thing, no problem. Stoning was a great little pastime for these little Israelites. Here's some stones. God didn't deliver laws to oxen. However, if an oxen killed a human, they'd be stoned to death. If an ox killed two people, the ox and its owner would be killed. However, there was no penalty for an owner whose ox only killed a man and a servant. That was okay. Those sacrificing other than to God would be killed. Working on the Sabbath was not punished by God, but by stoning. A man gathered sticks in the Bible on the Sabbath day, and Moses and Aaron commanded the entire congregation to stone him. Regarding homosexuals, Moses couldn't make up his mind as to whether simply to expel homosexuals, which he does in one part of the Bible, or to stone them to death in another part of the Bible. Magic and foretelling of events was forbidden. Wizards were to be stoned to death, witches were to be killed. However, Moses and Aaron were the only ones excluded from such punishment. A person who cursed their parents was to be stoned to death. You need a lot of stones in this religion. A man who blasphemed the name of God was to be stoned by the entire congregation. God is, after all, a sensitive fellow. Anyone, including friends and family, that tried to turn an Israelite away from following God should be stoned to death. Indeed, anyone who turned away from God should be stoned. And I don't mean given marijuana. Stubborn and rebellious sons could be stoned to death. There'd be no consideration as to why the son was stubborn and rebellious. If a man took a woman for a wife and decided that he hated her and then claimed that she wasn't a virgin, there were two possible consequences. If she was a virgin, he'd have to pay the parents of this lady 100 shekels and stay with her. He was stuck with her. However, if she wasn't a virgin, she'd be stoned to death. Apart from anything else, women had to be very careful about masturbating. There was also no reciprocity for a female having issues with a male. If a man lay with another man's wife, he and the wife would be stoned to death. If a man thought that his wife had committed adultery, he could take her to a priest. The priest would make a concoction of supposedly holy water. Now, we all know what holy means, don't we? Doesn't mean a whole lot. But anyway, he'd take this holy water, he'd sprinkle the filthy dirt from the blood-splattered tabernacle, put it into the jug over here, and the wife would have to drink this. Now, if she was guilty of having committed adultery, then she would be cursed. The water would become bitter, her belly would swell, her thigh would rot, and the woman would be a curse among her people. If she was innocent, however, she'd be clean and able to conceive. Surprisingly, there was no similar course for men. If it was so important to God, this adultery business, surely you'd think he'd sort of work it out and exact the punishment. Doesn't seem he ever did.
That just sounds like women.
Moses told his people at one stage that in return for subjugating themselves to God, they would receive rain and successful crops. These benefits, however, also came to those who didn't believe the godly gobbledygook. They would also apparently have peace. Well, it doesn't seem they had a lot of peace. When people opened their bowels, they had to dig a hole and bury the excrement. Now, I hope you've all noticed that he also gave this commandment to cats. He didn't, however, sort of mention it to dogs, elephants, horses, and that's why we're stuck with such a shitty world. Now, kosher is a wonderful thing, and halal with the Islamic faith too, but kosher is just a wonderful thing. A kosher kitchen requires two of pretty much everything, as meat and milk should not come together, even in a sink. So, if you're a kitchen cabinet maker, you've got to find some really religious Jews, because you're going to buy two of everything. So you've got two ovens, you've got two sinks, you've got two cooktops, two fridges. I mean, the whole business.
Two sets of knives.
So, but one of the interesting ways of making utensils, so if you've got a knife or a fork and you want to make it kosher, like you've gotten some meat on it and you really want to make it kosher so you can mix it with milk, then what you do is you jab it into the dirty ground 10 times and then it's kosher. And maybe worms sort of help keep it kosher, I don't know. The equipment used for cooking, so forget about actually what you're mixing food in, but the equipment you use for cooking, such as a cooktop or oven, and this just goes to prove that that's the case, have to be made kosher. So even though you're not going to sort of wipe the food off the inside of the oven that's splattered or on the cooktop that's been splattered, you have to make that kosher. You have to be pure and not in contact with the two types of foods.
And still do, I should say. Most of the eastern suburbs, a particular suburb that I will not mention, are still doing that today. They have two sets of dishes, two sets of everything.
The more religious, the more ridiculous.
Yep.
The Sabbath. Now, here's just some real gems. On the Sabbath, work in the public domain is prohibited. So you're not allowed to work. And you see these Jews walking around. They're not allowed to work. They walk to their synagogues rather than driving, and all this sort of caper. Anyway, so you're not allowed to work, travel, spend money, carry items outside the home, including keys, prayer books, canes, walkers, and children. So, to overcome this burden, an area could be converted to a private domain by surrounding a designated area with a wire, just a wire. Just put it around the place. It's called an eruv.
You have 2 minutes.
And then it was okay to do these various things. God's name was Yahweh, but Jews weren't to use his name. They weren't apparently to see his face or they'd die, but some people got to see God's behind. God wanted a covenant with the Israelites that they be genitally mutilated. Now, this in polite company is known as circumcision. Genital mutilation was to be conducted 8 days after a baby's birth. If a baby's not to be the one to make a decision about a covenant with God, how's it reasonable that they should be mutilated? Why aren't males simply born without foreskin? By some amazing coincidence, other animals also have foreskins, but they don't have to go through circumcisions. A man with any external reproductive organs damaged wasn't allowed to enter the congregation. Now, I'm presuming that doesn't mean the circumcisions. However, if a priest damaged a child's genital organs during circumcision, well, that was the child's problem. Now, during Passover, and that's where Jesus does his thing, only unleavened wheat is allowed. Foods or drinks made of most other grains aren't allowed to be in a religious Jew's possession during Passover. So to get around this, what they do is they sell non-Jews their wheat and various breads, and after the Passover they buy it back. Sounds pretty clever to me. Now, I've just got to tell you about winning battles. If the Israelites won battles, it was because they were subservient to God. Whilst when they lost, it was because they weren't subservient to God.
That's right.
But Moses was the master of deceit. At one stage in a battle, when Moses was holding up his magic rod, he had a magic rod. If you wonder where the magic rods come from, all our magicians, it comes from Moses. So Moses is holding up his magic rod, and when he had it up, the Israelites won. But, you're sitting at a battle, first half hour's all right, after 2-3 hours, your arm starts getting a bit tired and it starts to drop. And of course, when it dropped, the Israelites lost in battle. Makes sense? So his mates propped his arm up so they kept winning.
Finish it.
Now, just one little bit. There's this, I have to tell you about this rabbi's wife. This rabbi's wife is in sewing classes. And all ladies are sitting and sewing and everything, and they've got their various materials. And the rabbi's wife's got this funny sort of lot of things that she's sewing together. And the ladies say to her, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I'm making a handbag, and it's one of these ones that you can get larger and get smaller." And they say, "Oh, how do you do that?" And she says, "Well, the rabbi, when he's finished with the foreskins, he gives them to me, and if I rub it, I get a bigger bag."
So I had blogged a little bit about, and I did a few talks here about Christianity and how crazy it is. So yeah, that's my blog. Anyway, I know I rambled in the first piece about the afterlife a fair bit, but it's an obsession of people of all faiths, as we've seen, a carrot for the end of their life. But this section will be more generic. Sure, Judaism came up with Yahweh, aka Jehovah, depending on how you pronounce the Tetragrammaton. I don't know if I pronounce that properly anyway. Or even if you're allowed to, he's a little bit like Voldemort. Sorry, he who must not be named. Jews will call him Adonai, aka Elohim, aka the Great I Am. It's a lot of AKIs. Are you on the run by any chance? Or?
No, I'm just courageous.
So maybe Judaism did introduce this, but Christianity made it popular. Besides, about 50% of Jews are, in most surveys, come out as non-believers. As Daniel Dennett said, some Christians believe in belief, but we run the entire gamut through to fundamentalists that believe the King James Version from 1611 is the true word of God and every other edition is not. Because 1611, yeah. Anyway, Christianity also loves to play the victim. They love to say that they are the ones that are being persecuted. They were persecuted a long time ago, but I don't think they're too persecuted nowadays. They happily push their crazy and ridiculous beliefs on anti-abortion and pro-gun, pro-war. Heck, they've set up pickets out the front of legitimate abortion clinics, set up fake clinics, set up helplines to guide women along to these fake abortion clinics so that they don't get an abortion. Christians are divided into these different denominations that I've already mentioned, but they're divided even further into different sects. Among Catholicism, which is, I guess, my speciality, you've got Franciscans, our current Pope. You've got your Jesuits. Oh, hang on. I've got a slide for that. There we go. There's the old Franciscan. They're changing it because of the someone pointed out it looks like a penis. But anyway, that's the old Franciscan. The old Franciscan cross. There's a little bit about Opus Dei. That's in my talk before. That's their whip. Anyway, they whip themselves. That's a sect of Catholicism and Christianity in general. Galileo was wrong. There's also flat earthers. So I think we've got one up on the creationist Muslims and the Jews. We've got flat earthers, seriously. And Galileo was wrong. They think the moon landing was completely faked. So he wasn't a Muslim, he was just a shill. Anyway, I'll try to wander a little bit from Catholicism in this and go to the rest of the Christian environment. Let's start with my favourite, the creationists. So the geocentrists are obviously also creationists. Even the famous Ken Ham, who is a creationist, said these guys were taking the Bible a little bit too literally. But that's another argument. Creationists who we've debated before, you might want to check YouTube, to break down their beliefs, they believe in a worldwide conspiracy by atheist scientists. I notice there's lots of scientists in the room, all your lab coats, of course.
to suppress the belief in creation and push the atheist agenda. I guess as I'm not a scientist, I don't get my paycheck at the end of this, but they not only have to ignore a mountain of evidence and research, they also have to deny evolution of bacteria and wiggle it into microevolution when it comes to these pathogens. Christian megachurches are another middle child only phenomenon. Christians are ridiculous structures the size of university campuses that regularly see more than 2,000 attendees in a single weekend. This includes one in our own neck of the woods, Hillsong, which gets anywhere up to 24,000 on a single weekend. They even managed recently to fill All Phones Arena in a single night for a single event for free. Well, they paid for it, and they probably got tithing anyway, which seats 21,000. But if we didn't have megachurches, we wouldn't get comments like this on Twitter from a megachurch pastor in the US. Which is a nice comment, I think. He's real too, by the way. Don't swallow anything that Satan's trying to ram down your throat. Jesus comes first. To wrap this section up, a little bit about Jesus. How many Jesuses are there? Every insane asylum is filled with them. Every small little cult, like the Divine Truth in Brisbane, which has AJ Miller as Jesus and his wife as Mary Magdalene, and the Branch Davidians in Waco before they were unfortunately gunned down, have a Jesus at the helm. I think we need to sit all these Jesuses down and get them to hash it out and find out which is the real one. And see which one can come back from the dead zombie style, or quickly ferment water into wine for the rest of us. Or pirate some loaves and fishes into more loaves and fishes. Then there's his supposed reason for coming to this earth. Your kids do wrong, so in your infinite power, first you try and drown them, but then you send your son, who's actually you, whom you then send to earth, predestined to die as a sacrifice, to appease yourself for your own lust and vengeance. Drugs for the writers of this text on, seriously. Absolutely ridiculous. Really puts the Pegasus ride and the Mountain of Foreskins to shame. As we saw from Raphael's talk a few months ago, and I'm sure you've all read his book by now, the case for Christ is even a rather tenuous one. There's a lot of evidence against the story being accurate. Even Christian theologians will quickly back down if you start talking about the birth of Christ, simply because there's a lot of evidence against it. One book says that he was born... the bit about the census I should start with. The census, there was never a Roman census that it was the entire Empire of Rome. Such an event's not recorded. Also, how much sense does it make to make all of your population trape across Europe and Africa to get back to their father's place of birth so they can fill out the census? There was a Judean census, but we fall into a different problem there. One gospel states that it happened during the reign of King Herod, but another account says it was during Emperor Augustus. Now, there's a 40-year gap between the two of these. So either Jesus was born and then was born again 40 years later, or it's just wrong, which, anyway. So ridiculous timeline, ridiculous beliefs, ridiculous tradition. It's a ridiculous religion. And that's it for my section.
Okay, I'm the last person, so thank you for bearing with us for so long. Now, apart from flying horses and angels in cave and little girls in bin liners, what else I can talk about Islam that's ridiculous? Of course, all of these I mentioned are mind-blowingly ridiculous. And Morgan mentioned Christians like to play the victim cards quite often. But no one plays victim cards better than Muslims. Muslims claim that Islam is the religion of peace, but it is actually the religion of permanent offense. They're almost always offended by the most trivial thing. Remember that cartoon, the turban bomb cartoon? Who would have known about it if they didn't make such a big fuss about it? Now it's everywhere. You can look it up in the internet, it's almost everywhere. And it's always gonna be there. And they're always offended by this stuff. You remember probably, well, I was quite young back then, but we all heard about Satanic Verses, Salman Rushdie's. This is my 1988 first edition hardcover. I love it. I love to show it. Because I only got 12 minutes, I want to cover one thing that I haven't covered, which is the story of the Satanic Verses. Many of you may already know, but those of you who don't know, how does this whole story come about? So during the early years when Muhammad was still preaching to the polytheists and pagans in general, and he wasn't getting much response, because to the polytheists, we got a business set up here, yearly pilgrimage, 360 idols inside the Kaaba. Why should we convert to a deity that we can't see, we can't talk to? I mean, it's all working nicely for us. So what Muhammad did offer to the polytheists of Mecca is we colloquially call the Satanic Verses. So apparently, Muhammad uttered something like this, that yes, you can worship my God Allah, and I can worship and accept that Allah basically literally in Arabic means God. Allah has 3 daughters, which is back that time where Arabs own female deity. Al-Lat, Al-Manat, Al-Ujja, there were 3 deities. So Muhammad set up this, or came to this compromise. This is a very strange story, and many Muslims either will give you a very dodgy explanation of what actually happened, or they will completely deny it. But if you look at the earliest biography and the interpretation, particularly by Ibn Taymiyyah and the Sirah Rasulullah, which is the first biography of the Prophet, you will see what actually happened, Muslims claim, is that Satan came to the Prophet pretending to be the Archangel Gabriel, and Prophet was fooled, and Satan uttered those verses, which then Prophet went ahead and told the infidels that, we're compromising, we'll worship each other's deities, all good. But a few days later, a real Gabriel appeared to Muhammad and said, hang on, the guy who you talked to before wasn't me, that was the Satan, the bad guy, hence Satanic Verses. We're going to replace those verses with these. Allah doesn't have any daughters, He is one and only, and you accept Him basically as one and only. And Salman Rushdie used that story and created a novel out of it, the Satanic Verses, which offended Muslims greatly. And really, if you read the novel, yeah, it is. If you are a Muslim, yes, you would be offended. There's nothing wrong being offended. The thing is, if you're offended, keep it to yourself. Don't go out and blow yourself up. Don't kill people. Chill out. Listen to music and things like that. But they kill many people. They killed the translator of the book. In Japan, Salman Rushdie went into hiding for 20 years. It's a long story. Obviously, the fatwa has been lifted, or they say it's been lifted, but obviously, he still needs to be careful. So Islam is the religion of permanent offense. You have to be very careful what you talk or what you say in public space. The media is afraid of portraying Islam as is. It's afraid of reproducing the article or the cartoon or the movie. That crap movie, I forgot what it was called. But they're always afraid of offending Muslims. And we are always in the back foot, because you can almost always say or talk about the life of Brian, but you can't have a life of Mo, and not yet anyway, but it's really difficult to talk about these stuff. And this is the most ridiculous stuff, I think. When these guys talk about Judaism and Christianity, and that's great. I mean, they had their time as well. Islam is comparatively new. It is true. However, compared to Islam's global aim of domination, Christianity, for example, if you accept Jesus as the Savior and you be a private Christian, you're okay. You probably will be, saved. You just have to wait for rapture. That's pretty much it, as much as I'm concerned. Jews, yeah, more or less, live by the codes. They probably don't even believe in heaven or hell as much as Muslims do. With Islam, it's very different. It's very, very enforced, practical religion. You have to go with the code. You accept it as a total system, or you don't. It's a total overarching system. And that's ridiculous, but it's dangerous, and it's dangerously ridiculous. So the word religion is very much like sports. You can have badminton and you can have kickboxing, and they're very different. Or you can have rugby, or you can have cricket, and they're also very different. One has more class than the other. So the problem with Islam is the fact that people are not quite open to accept any criticism of it. And that's one of the challenges we face. And although we had good fun tonight, I think the ridiculousness, the almost illogical, totally illogical worldview of most Muslims and the worldview they want to impose to the rest of us is scary, to say the least. And I want to end with that. Thank you.
Any questions?
With a fatwa,
yes.
How holy does the person who presents it have to be? Because we hear that a fatwa is raised by somebody like, somebody's not even holy.
Yes.
So what gives them the authority, and what makes Muslims follow them?
Yes, it's a very good question. I mean, Islam in general don't have the papacy. It has avoided that Catholic papal system in most cases. The fatwa for Salman Rushdie came from Ayatollah Khomeini. Although he is a Shia leader, most Muslims do respect him. Muslim Sunnis, I should say. Most Sunni Muslims do respect him quite a lot. And when he uttered the fatwa, most Muslims across the world took it as their holy duty. And if any ordinary Muslim could find Rushdie, they would have done it what the fatwa said. Generally, fatwas are more parochial, more local than that.
Bin Laden issued one, didn't he? And he wasn't even a holy man.
Yeah, well, Bin Laden, and this is where moderates will try to tell you that the version of Islam that Bin Laden was talking about isn't really the right Islam, or it's a twisted version of Islam. But the truth is, what Bin Laden was talking about is a very plausible version of the Muslim doctrine. You can split the hair and you can debate about whether an apostate should be killed immediately or should they be killed after they talk out in the street and preach their apostasy or make it very open. But the fact is, almost everyone agrees, almost every school of thought in Islam agrees that the punishment for apostasy is death. So you can split here and you can disagree between these school of thoughts, but they almost agree. They see themselves or the world as divided into two spheres: the world of Islam and the world of Kufr. And it is the duty of the world of Islam to conquer the world of Kufr, which is the world of infidel. And that's they see as their holy duty. So, people like Bin Laden, I won't say necessarily that they were interpreting Islam exactly, but they were interpreting Islam very plausibly based on the examples of the life, or from the life of Prophet and from the early Muslims. And Bin Laden got it from many Egyptian earlier preachers and clerics, Sayyid Qutb, for example. They were very influential, hardcore Islamic clerics who brought about this Wahhabi movement. And you may know that the Wahhabis are really, really hardcore about the way they go about. Most Al-Qaeda operatives are Wahhabi in their belief. So yeah, look, there are obviously different opinions, but I think it's very trivial, because if you for writing a novel, you can have a worldwide protest and people can be burned or killed. But you will never see such an outrage for female genital mutilation, which happens almost on a daily basis in Middle East and also in UK and in some other countries. I don't know about Australia.
Australia too.
And Australia too.
Yeah.
See. So you won't see any such outrage in the street. So it is not enough to say that Bin Laden and the fundamentalists are misinterpreting Islam. It's not the fundamentalists that are the problems. It's the fundamentals of Islam that is the problem. And although I probably didn't answer your question quite, but yes, with fatwa, it can be global, like we saw in the case of Salman Rushdie, but more often it's very parochial, like local. For example, in parts of Bangladesh, music is banned, or in other parts it's okay. In parts of Afghanistan, well, in Pakistan, for example, 1,000 women get killed every year by their family members, which they call honor killing, for bringing shame into the family. It could be a rape. They could have been victims of rape. And in Islam, obviously, victims of rape gets punished, and man passes the judgment. So obviously, so these things never bring about these outrage that we see in case of Salman Rushdie. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the answer, but yeah, fatwa seems very fragmented. There is no central authority.
Just to follow on from what you were saying about various interpretations of Islam, many moderate Muslims who I meet would say that the way that you are interpreting Islam is absolutely correct. That those Muslims who interpret Islam that way are really not Muslims. Because after all, Islam is the religion of peace.
Of course. Of course.
So are they deluding themselves? Are they lying? What?
Well, it's most. Sorry.
I believe that they are sincere in saying. I accept that they are sincere.
I accept many of them are sincere. Yes, I accept many of them are sincere in living in denial. Yes, they are sincere in the world they live in. And it's a built-in mechanism, it's a protection mechanism. Remember, Islam makes a very, very special claim. It claims itself to be the final version of the Abrahamic story. It's the fulfillment of the prophecy, and it's the best of all Abrahamic religion. But when Muslims look at themselves throughout the world, they are suffering politically, economically, everywhere. And when they see that, they have to reconcile it somehow. And the way they reconcile it is this. They say they're not following Islam correctly. And that's the problem they think. If they follow Islam correctly, then of course this won't be the case. Now moderates, in my opinion, they betray both their faith and they betray themselves. Because of course, it is true that moderates are of course better than people like Bin Laden. But moderates give people like Bin Laden the support they need, the silence they need. When was the last time moderates went out in the street and protested against, let's say, female genital mutilation? Never happens. This silence is what gives rise to fundamentalism. Yes, it is true that some people are more fundamentalist than others. But again, I go back to my previous comment. It's really like splitting hairs. It's like, or should I beat my wife with a small stick, or should I beat her? And if I beat her, whereabouts should I beat her? And is it okay for people to see that I have beaten her? I mean, you just go to YouTube. There are clerics giving instructions how to beat your wife, and there are different opinions on how to beat your wife. And you can say one is more moderate than other, but it's very trivial. It's essentially going back to the fundamental of Islam.
Enough, I'm getting depressed. Sorry, last question. I'm really depressed now.
My last question is going to be related to what you just said, which is a lack of critical thinking, not only in your religion, but across all three. How do you reconcile whether it's moderate or more extreme Islam people, believing people? They go to university and they study and they come across as half intelligent when you talk to them, but then they switch over like as if it's, like something's gone off in their brain and all critical thinking goes out the window.
Yes.
Sort of like,
Yeah.
it's my religion, it's my faith, and that's okay. That's their argument.
It's not actually a problem for all three, for all of us, and I think
there are plenty
I'll
of
invite
creationist professors.
Can I answer that question?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting difficulty that we have. If you've got a person that's basically a half-wit, you can understand that they don't get it and they will go along with all this rubbish. That's fine. And of course, what we consider that to be is cognitive dissonance. Yeah, okay. They've got a logic, but they compartmentalise part of their logic system and protect this little thing called their religion. Now, the greatest difficulty is when you've got a very intelligent person who has cognitive dissonance, because they have the intelligence to argue their point, even though they've got the cognitive dissonance, but they're better at arguing their position than anybody else. So then you've got a real problem. Like when we had an Islamic debate earlier this year against Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is an extremist Islamic organisation. We argued with these guys, and one of them was a lawyer, and is a very good debater, excellent debater, very intelligent guy. He read through, I've written something, and it critiques like that, if you like, the Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But he claims to have read it all, and he could find no contradiction, no inconsistency, nothing that he disagreed with. Not one item in the Quran did he disagree with. Yet he went to Sydney High School, which is an elite high school. He's a lawyer, very intelligent, and he shuts part of his brain down, and he will argue very effectively because he's very intelligent.
Do you want to use some final words?
I just mentioned that's not the way it's done. Take my word for it.
Let me tell you something, Sam.
Adults, perhaps, but not children.
But don't forget that at one stage, Jacob's sons afflict these people, and all these males, adult males in the township, are circumcised. And while they're suffering with their circumcision, they go around and kill them all.
No, I wasn't the point. The point I'm making is that that's adult. A child being circumcised at an early age is just like a small cut. And it just cuts the end. There's no scalpels, etc.
The problem that I had was it was such a small picture of such a small penis, it wouldn't have fitted in there.
And it wouldn't be so dramatic either, so I think the point you make is very bad.
Just press the space button. Just press the space button. Big space button.
Okay. There's a gentleman called Mark Twain, and this is one of my favourite sayings. And he said, religion was invented when the first con man met the first fool. And I put to you that Moses was the first con man. Thank you.
So we've got Americans on our side, so we win. But anyway, if you do a cross like that, yeah, anyway. So I'm going to start my closing bit with a joke. It actually won the internet's funniest religious joke last year, but anyway. I once saw this guy on a bridge about to jump. I said, don't do it. He said, nobody loves me. I said, God loves you. Do you believe in God? He said, yes, I do. I said, are you a Christian or a Jew? He said, I'm a Christian. I said, me too. Protestant or Catholic? He said, Protestant. I said, me too. What franchise? He said, Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist? He said, Northern Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist? He said Northern Conservative Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes or Northern Conservative Baptist Eastern Region? He said Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region. I said, me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Council Region of 1912? He said Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. I said, die heretic, and pushed him off. That's by Emo Phillips, who was very disappointed that he didn't get credited. But anyway, all religions are crazy and scary, but are they ridiculous? Are they to be ridiculed? Sure, plenty of comedians make a living off ridiculing Jews, Jerry Seinfeld, but plenty more make plenty more money off ridiculing Christianity. You don't see many make ridiculing Islam. They're none of that brave. In this respect, Christianity is the most ridiculed and thus the most ridiculous. More ridiculous in the fact that there are a pantheon of sects, larger than any of my opponents' religions. The fact that their mythos is so convoluted it would take several lifetimes just to get up to speed. The fact that you're expected to buy impervious to weapons with Mormons in their magic underwear, poisons and harm with Presbyterians in their snake handling. You're accepted to buy that a wafer and wine becomes the literal body and flesh of a guy that died 2,000 years ago, as the Catholics believe. And that adherents can speak unknown languages or talk to the creator of it all, as the Catholics believe of the Pope. Or that you will live on forever in worship of this insecure, vicious, psychopathic, all-loving, all-knowing being. I think it's clear from the small number of examples that I've given that my ex-belief of Christianity is by far the most ridiculous. Not just of the religions here, but of probably all the ones that humans have ever came up with. Even with its legitimising 2 billion adherents, protecting it from wider criticism. Thank you.
Well, I'm so depressed now that I can't even believe in myself anymore.
Come back on, all is forgiven.
It is true that apostates are killed in Islam. Because Islam, being such an empty and ridiculous faith, with its mindless plagiarism from Judaism and Christianity, with its very badly written traditional textbooks like Quran and Hadith, with its pathological fear of women, with its sexual repression, with its ignorant little bubble of righteousness, and with its chronic and crude threat of violence. For any time you open your mouth to criticize Islam, or you criticize or speak up for freedom, equality, diversity, difference of opinion, or genuine human right, it makes Islam the most ridiculous and most dangerous of all religions. And no other religious faith makes me ashamed as a human being, makes me uncomfortable as a human being, as Islam and its ridiculous beliefs. And that is why I think Islam is the most ridiculous of all Abrahamic religions.